Okay everybody, welcome. This is going to be a tech video for those of you who might be interested in learning how to replace the flyback transformer on your arcade monitor chassis. This chassis here is a Neotech 2515C, and the problem that I'm having with it is that the longer that it's powered on, the more out of focus it gets. When I first turn it on, it starts off nice and clear, and the longer it's on, it gets more out of focus and more out of focus, and that is a classic sign of a failing flyback transformer. So before it completely fails altogether, I'm going to replace it. I also have a cap kit here, which will be a different video. I might not even do a video because there's plenty of videos out there on how to change cap kits or do cap kits, so I may not end up doing one at all, but I may also decide to do it depending on how the mood strikes me. But this will be basically just for replacing the flyback. For those of you who aren't familiar, the flyback transformer is the large black deal located here. This is what powers up and energizes the picture tube. And on the actual flyback itself, there are two settings here. I don't know if we can see. This is the focus. Get these out of the way. This is the focus, you can see there. And this is the screen. This is basically your main control for the brightness. And then of course the top one here is focus for clarity of image. And I'll get to all that later when we do the off check after replacing it. So first things first, when you remove your chassis, it's most likely going to be dirty, so I always take these and give them a nice clean bath. Coat them in some simple green, get some nice hot water, and just completely clean it as best you can. Leave it for a couple days to completely dry. That way when you work on it, it's clean and you don't end up getting yourself filthy with how dirty the chassis is. So the first thing I do is always clean it. Then I inspect it for any possible visual problems before I even begin working on it. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll take a zip tie here and I'll zip tie the remote board harness if your chassis has a remote board. I always take the remote harness here and zip tie it to the frame, if you will, so that way the wires on the chassis aren't getting bent back and forth and bent back and forth when you're constantly turning it over and turning it over and turning it over. The wires won't get broken off that way. So I secure the harness here so they strain relief on this point and not on the actual wires, and they prevents them from getting broken off. So I actually prefer to do that. So after we get it clean and we put our zip tie here to prevent the wires from breaking off and give it a nice general look over, everything is secure and looks good, the first step is to actually start desoldering the flyback. So we'll begin with that. Let me zoom in here and I'll get a better picture so you can follow along with exactly what I'm doing. Alright, so before I zoom in and get started here, I want to mention that I'm not a fan of the solder sucker at all. A lot of people like to use the solder sucker, and I'm just not a fan because it has a tendency to not completely remove all the solder. It has a tendency also to fling hot solder everywhere if you don't use it properly. It will create solder bridges, and you'll be scratching your head trying to figure out where the bridge is that you've just created. So I don't like using the sucker at all. My personal weapon of choice is the desoldering braid. Now there's two versions of the braid, one that has flux in it and one that doesn't have flux in it. Now I prefer to use the one that has the flux in it because if you don't, you have to add your own flux to the braid. And if you're not familiar with what the flux does, is the flux actually helps the solder flow into the braid. So this stuff here will get all the solder off that I want. It won't create any solder bridges. It does leave residue, flux residue on the board, but that can be cleaned up easily once we're done, and I'll show you how to do that when that time comes. But I would recommend getting some of this. You can get this from MAT Electronics. You can see how much I have on this roll here compared to what a full roll looks like, so you can see that I use a lot of it. I actually prefer to use this. I highly recommend it over the solder sucker because that thing is just problems waiting to happen. I'm not a fan of it at all. Anyway, so like I mentioned, I recommend using this, so I will use this to get this solder off of here. So let me zoom in. Alright, hopefully that'll work. So it's basically just as simple as applying this to the pad and then using the actual soldering iron to remove and heat up the pad and remove the existing solder. So I heat up the pad first, get the solder to flow, then I add the braid to it, and you'll see it just flow right up into the braid. And you just move it down the line until all the solder is removed from the pad. Depending on how much solder there is, it might take a little bit. And you'll go through a lot of this, so don't be afraid to use as much of it as you want. So there you have it. That's the first pad. Let me see if you can. There you go. So you can see there's a little bit left, but the hole is still open. So, and all that residue of the flux there, that will be removed later with some alcohol and an acid brush. So you just repeat that process for all the pads. Get this back in frame there. There we go. And it's as simple as that. So let's go through and I'll go ahead and just get all these going here. And you do kind of want to be cognizant of where the braid is going, because you don't want this braid gets pretty hot when it heats up like this, so you don't want it to lay or rest on any random pad, because you might not be paying attention and it actually might suck the solder up from another adjacent pad and you don't notice it. So you want to pay attention or be aware of where it's lying against the other pads while you're doing this. Now this looks like somebody has bent over that leg there, those kind folks. So I'll have to see about bending that straight up again here when we get done. And then you just pull more out as it rolls around the roll here. And next pad, on we go. Heat it up so it starts to flow. Then add our braid. And it flows right into it. This is just my preferred method of doing this over the sucker, because this will not create any bridges that will cause you headaches in the future after you complete this project. Alright, that looks good. And occasionally, when this gets long enough to be bothersome, you just cut it off with a pair. Oh, sorry, you just cut it off with a pair of diagonal cutters. So, on to the next one. You'll hear me blowing on this occasionally because I don't want to breathe in the fumes. It's never a good thing. Alright, there's that one. Heat that up. Alright, that looks good. Someone's got a lot on this one. Still some left. Alright, that looks good. Alright. A little bit more. Alright, that looks good. Clean off the soldering tip. Get rid of that. Alright, so there are still 2 more tabs to get. Let's see, the new one here, I don't know if it's too close to see, but there are 2 extra tabs on the face of this. They are right here, these two. These 2 here are not normally on a everyday chassis. Some chassis have those, some don't, or some flybacks do, some don't. So you'll see that this one does. So those 2 tabs correspond to this one here, and I believe this one here. So I'll have to desolder those. So we'll heat the tab. And these are bent over as well, so someone was kind enough to do that. I don't know why they do that. It makes more headaches for me when I'm trying to do this. But them's the breaks. Alright. Next one. There's some on the actual. Okay, now there is a screw on the side here that I'm going to have to remove. Well, where is it at? Right there. I'm going to take that screw out, and then this entire assembly, just zoom out, sorry. This entire assembly should just come right off of there. So I'm going to have to get myself a screwdriver. 1 second. Alright, got my screwdriver. Let's take the screw out here. Okay, now my flyback should come right out. So let's see. It may not always come out easy, but sometimes you got to fight it. And you don't want to manhandle it too much. So I'm still getting some resistance. So now we have to double check things here. Oop. I don't know how that got tangled up in there. Ah, that's why. My bent tab. Gonna have to figure out how to get that unbent. I guess the best way would be to just bend it straight up. There we go. See if that helped. Nope, still giving me issues. It's not always cut and dry. So we shall re-examine, see what the issue is. Looks like there's a little bit of solder left on this tab here. So let's reflow this. And if I wasn't filming this, I guarantee it would have come right the hell out. So I don't see anything else that might be. Oh, well, duh. Of course, I mentioned I wouldn't be making these mistakes if I wasn't filming it, but I had the orientation of this thing wrong. So it turns out that the two tabs here I mentioned on the flyback that are this one and that one, these 2 posts there, I had it wrong. It's not this tab and this one, it's this one and this one right there. I gotta unflow that one or desolder that one. So that's my mistake. That's why you don't want to manhandle it too much, because you don't want to break anything trying to He-Man it out of there. So, well, yeah, these are the kind of mistakes that you make while you're filming. Come on. There we go. Now it should come out with ease. Oh. There we go. Simple as that. Well, alright, so the next step is going to be removing the wires that go to the neck board. Now, you're going to have two connections. You're going to have a connection here on the neck and another connection over here that goes to the actual board itself. Now, different chassis have different connections, and I have a K7400 here for comparison. You'll see on this neck board it has the wire going to the neck is actually just a simple press and lock setup. You'll see the wire comes right out. And when you put the wire in there, there's a little arm in there. When you put the wire in there, it creates tension against the wire, and the tension holds the wire in. You just simply insert it, and now there's tension on the wire, and you close back the cover here, and that's it. And then the other one here has a connector for it. And there's when you replace the flyback on this type of setup, you can see here I just used a wire nut. But actually, to be quite honest, the proper way to do it would be to actually strip the wires, solder them together, and then cover them with cover the solder joint with a couple of pieces of heat shrink, because you don't want the electricity to jump through the heat shrink, because it has a tendency to do that. So you want to cover it with at least 2 pieces of heat shrink to prevent that from happening. But if you're lazy like me, you just use the wire nut. So anyway, so you can see here, this is an example of 2 quick disconnects on the neck board. Well, this Neotech doesn't have the 2 quick disconnects. It has 2 solder connections. This is a solder connection under here, and a solder connection here at the board right there for the 2 wires. So we have to desolder both of those. Now, there's different ways to achieve this. You have to pry open the sides of this that hold the tabs down. Okay, and this should just open up just like that. So you can see here that the focus wire goes right here and it's soldered in. Let me zoom in. You can see that's soldered in right there. So you have to desolder that. So let's try and accomplish that as best we can. Keep it in frame here, probably not, because I'm no good at working the camera on my own. All right. So now this is plastic, so you don't want to heat it up too much, because the plastic will, of course, melt. But you do have to, unfortunately, heat it up enough to get that wire off of there. So you can see I've already done a little bit of melting there. So bend that wire open and out it comes, just like that. So it's fairly simple, fairly cut and dry. So there's one more left. That will be the other one. Remove a couple of these zip ties. And one more, and that corresponds to this pad right there. Sorry for the terrible camera work, but like I say, it's hard for me to watch the camera and watch what I'm doing and go back and forth and all that. So okay. Should come out. There it is. So you see I desoldered there, the wire came right out. So that should be it. Now this flyback should just, the whole assembly should come off. But I need to get rid of these 2 that zip tie, and actually all these zip ties. Got it all tied together here. And this whole assembly here should now, there you go, completely removed. Now it's time to put the new one in. And of course everything goes back the way that it was. If you look here, you want to make sure you get the right wires in the right spot. So you got the The thicker wire, the focus wire, is the white one, and the thinner red one goes to the actual solder point on the neck board, and then the focus one goes to the neck connection, if that makes sense. So on the new one, it's the same basic type of thing. You'll see the colors are different. You got gray and red instead of white and red, but the focus one is the thick one, and the gray one here is the one that solders to the neck board. So you want to make sure you get the correct ones in the right spot. So the red one is going to solder to the neck connection, and then the gray one's going to solder to that post, the this one here. So that's the secondary portion of the install. So let's go ahead. First, you have to make sure you get your posts lined up with the holes, and because you don't want to try and shove it on there and bend or break anything. So I've kind of already previously done that. So you want to try and get the holes lined up as best as you can, and it's not always easy, but hopefully this should go right down in there. Sometimes you got to turn it around and look through down this way and see if the holes are lined up. It should be somewhat close, because I've kind of already tried to judge it. Come on. Well, that's somewhat close. There it is, went right in. So now the new one is in, but it's not wanting to stay in. There we go. Alright, so there we have the new ones in, and it's time to simply start soldering it. So let me zoom in. And it's just a simple matter of applying your solder. Now what I do is I will actually apply the iron to the pad. Let me clean the tip off first here. I will apply the iron to the pad, and then apply the solder to it as it heats up. So basically something like this. I'll apply heat to the pad, and then I'll put the solder on like that. Now you don't want to use too much, but you do want to have the whole pad covered. So that's about enough right there. So we'll continue on here with the rest of it. And I'll jump from side to side just to make sure I get some good coverage. That's pretty good. Sorry about that. Alright. And I want to make sure to reflow the one that I desoldered that I shouldn't have. Okay, that's good. You don't need a lot. You just want to make sure that the whole pad's covered. You don't need to drown it in solder, because you don't want all that extra solder to flow back down the post and create a bridge underneath that you're not aware of. All right. Okay, now we got our two that were up front. And that's it. We give it a good look over, make sure we didn't miss anything. Now, everything looks okay. So next comes the cleanup, and then after we clean it up, we reflow it one more time. So I got to cut off these posts that are too long. There's one. There's the other. So what you want to do is, I forgot to grab it. I have to get some alcohol, isopropyl alcohol, and my acid brush. And when I come back here, you'll see exactly how to properly clean this and get all the flux off of this board. So 1 second. Okay, so I got my alcohol, I got my acid brushes. I used to use toothbrushes in the past, old toothbrushes, but I have since graduated to acid brushes. Now, you'll see these are called acid brushes. I've got 3 that I've cut the hair off of, and 1 that I haven't. Now, by cutting the hair off, it makes it more rigid, and it's easier to actually get rid of some of this stuff. And then after I do that, then we use this one to fine clean everything. So I'll zoom back in here and get yourself some isopropyl alcohol. I'll zoom back in here and we'll start cleaning this up. You don't want to leave this stuff on there because over time it will start to conduct electricity. So that, of course, would not be a good thing. So we get some alcohol on our brush, and it's just a matter of brushing all this stuff away. And it takes some finesse. Just take your time, work around all the pads. You don't want to do this before you solder in the new one because you have a tendency to damage the pads. So you can already see how much better that is. It's looking pretty good. And we'll go ahead and dab it here with a paper towel. You want to dab it. You don't want to run it around because you'll just tear all the paper towel to hell. So you just dab it on here. So then we take our brush with all the bristles, this right there, and we'll use that to fine clean, if you will. I'll trademark that phrase. Oh, snagged it a bit. Okay, that's looking pretty good. See if I can zoom in here even more. Well, that should give you an idea there. You can see how clean and all that looks. So you can see some pits there in those pads. That's why I reflow it. So let's go ahead and heat it back up, reflow it. That's not bad there. It's missing part of the pad on that one. That right there is the guide. So you can see somewhat right here. There is that area there. That's part of the. That's not a part of the pad that's missing, and it's not a gap or a hole. It's, well, it is a gap, but it's designed to be that way. There's the actual pad is kind of like a Pac-Man shape. It doesn't actually go completely around in a circle on this particular chassis. So if you see that, like you can see that on number 1 and number 3 and 4, 5, 6, 7. So that is actually common for this particular chassis. So we'll reflow these a bit. I always do this just to make sure. Damn neighbor's doing yard work. Doesn't he know I'm trying to film? Inconsiderate bastard. Alright, so that part's done. Now while you have the chassis over like this, it's a good idea to go ahead and go through the entire bottom of it and look for any suspicious solder joints or anything that looks suspicious whatsoever. And you also want to try and reflow whatever you can. In this particular instance, like, you would want to reflow your yoke connection, you'd want to reflow your IC connections, you'd want to reflow your RGB input, the connections for your remote board, anything that looks like it might be suspicious, or any other problem that arises that's common to chassis like this. You want to reflow it while you have a chance here when it's upside down like this. So I'm not going to go through all that here in this video, but anyway, so there you have it. That's how you do everything on the bottom side. And the last part here is I mentioned, let's see if I can, there we go. I mentioned that this one here is going to be the one that attaches to this connection here for this. So we will put that back through there and then bend it over like they had it before, which may be easier said than done. There we go. So we'll zoom back in here for a second. And I will apply some solder to that. And you just apply the soldering iron to the post. Gosh darn it. And leave it on there for a good 3 to 5 seconds. And just allow that solder to flow nice and evenly through there. And then hold it in place while it cools. And then that's it. And that looks pretty good. So then you simply close this back up. Sorry if it's hard for me to do this and not see what I'm doing. I'm sorry. But anyway, you can see that I've got that soldered in there. And then you simply just close that back up. You might want to bend these tabs back in a bit and then close it. Alright, so that part's done. The only thing left to do is to solder the gray wire to its corresponding location, which would be right there. I'll bend it over a bit so it stays. Get some solder and hold it on there for a few seconds. And there we go. Not the prettiest solder joint. I don't have any of my flux out here. I don't quite like the way that looks, so I'm going to put a little bit more on there. That's better. Fill that hole up real quick. There. Alright gang, that's it. Successfully replaced. So, with that being said, I have one last thing to impart to you. 99.9% of these flybacks, when you get them and they're brand new, the screen pot that I mentioned before is all the way off. So you'll have to, when you first power it up and you don't see anything on the screen, don't freak out. It's most likely because the screen pot itself is all the way down. For some reason, these brand new flybacks arrive with the screen pot completely off. So when you first power it up, don't freak out if it's got no screen. As long as you have neck glow, you're okay. Just check your screen pot, because the screen pot is most likely completely down. So, you know, turn it up maybe a quarter turn. It doesn't take much, and then you should have an image. So then you can adjust it properly from that point. Now I'm not going to show the new flyback in action, because I still have a huge cap kit to install, and I most likely will show the operation of the new flyback in a separate video. So I have to get this cap kit installed. I may or may not show it on video. I probably won't. But I will show the operation of the flyback and the cap kit once it's all installed. First power up, I promise, the first time I power it up, I will have the camera rolling so you can see that it works in action. And hopefully there's no issues with it. Of course, I have a pretty good track record, but we'll see. So before you actually consider this complete, I would give it one more good look over and then call it good. So hopefully that helps you out. Sorry if I'm long-winded or I repeat myself. I'm not good with coming up with stuff to say on the fly. And like I say, I'm sorry about the poor camera work, but hopefully this gives you an idea of how to change it out properly and how to get it all set up. So thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, let me know.